A myth is a story that permeates the mind and affects how we act and think in the world. But aren't myths something old from the past? They aren't. We are living our own myth right now as a global species, and it is the most dangerous myth in all of human history. That myth is called scientism. And hold on, stay with me just a moment longer because I'm not talking about science, I'm talking about scientism. Scientism. It affects the planet, the global economy, and perhaps most of all, our ability to feel authentic connection to anyone or anything. The myth of your life is front and center. It is on every news station and article, in every grocery store aisle, and in every influencer's content online. Scientism is the myth of the academic world today that is claiming an authority that for many people like you and I blocks collective growth and collective consciousness evolving because it denies that anything deeper than information, technology, or material growth exists. Now, hear me out just a moment longer because I'm not saying that we need to deny science or, God forbid, accept religion. What I am saying is scientism is not science, but it serves as a religion for billions of people, even when they're not aware of it. And yes, this might mean you. Scientism prevents leaps in consciousness because it denies transcendent connection altogether. And I'm going to suggest this is the most popular and dangerous religion of today precisely because it denies that it is one. It is taken with an authority that cannot be challenged without serious consequences. And that's what I want to share with you today, this taboo subject that is rarely talked about publicly, the myth of scientism, how because everything is predictable and explainable under scientism, faith in scientism makes the concept of science a god in its own right, one that defines how we act and think. More importantly, it prevents us from acting and thinking in ways that for millions of years went hand in hand with conscious, cognitive, and emotional progress for humanity. The veil of scientism denies transcendence has any reality or purpose for humans. This fundamentalism sells a narrative that keeps us alone, small, and feeling quite hollow inside. Today, we're going to look at how we can move past these mental frameworks, often subliminal, in order to step into something more authentic. I'm going to show you how it is our birthright to know the transcendent capacity that evolved with us for so long, and precisely for that, to transcend what we thought it is to be human. And I want to offer to you that it doesn't begin somewhere out there. It begins with you right now, and may even already now within yourself be calling you to get back in touch with it. Now, before we get into it, I know hitting that subscribe button may seem like something small, but to me, your attention is valuable. That is why I commit to creating content that is well-researched and bridges these current dynamics of society, philosophy, history, science, and self. If you're looking for a more peaceful, grounded way of living, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button. I would love to have you along for the ride. Thank you. Now let's get back to the video. The dogma of scientism has degraded our collective ability to expand into the fullness of what it really is to be human. But what is scientism? Scientism is the belief that everything can be explained through the process of doing science in order to gain information, and that this information is the highest reflection of what is true in the universe. It says that if there is anything to be known, it can be known through doing science. And anything that can't be explained through this prediction method that we call science is rendered useless, meaningless, or fanciful. It's not worth looking into. It gets dismissed. I want to be very clear. Just like scientism is different from doing science, subscribing to a specific religion is different from including the transcendent function or the divine capacity into one's emotional, intellectual life. To legitimately regard a spiritual dimension in one's life is what Carl Jung called including the transcendent function in one's life. While religion has a moral code and a hierarchy of authority to officiate and enforce those codes, the transcendent function is not limited to that. It's not limited to any specific religious human doctrines. It's beyond human. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not asking that you find religion today. Quite the opposite. We're talking about how scientism blocks the transcendent function and therefore inhibits our ability to feel and experience love, like really experience love. And really how and why we should change the myth that we live by. The reason scientism is increasingly a problem for us is that it encourages an emotional downshift for each of us. And when we as humans live under cultural oppressive systems, we need to challenge those kinds of narratives by accessing or relying on something outside the very systems that oppress. But that system today denies anything exists outside of it, just like a religion. But because scientism has been adopted even beyond religious sectors, it has eroded trust collectively across humanity, across nations. And the trust that has been eroded is in something greater than us, that unites us and allows us to think critically, while imagining new ways of living on Earth. Transcendence requires communication, an inner dialogue with something beyond me, beyond our egoic mind. But scientism breeds a mindset that discourages authentic communication between ourselves and others, which leads to a lack of trust. Instead of an interconnected mindset, it instills values of individualism, separation, and competition. And think of all the seriously regarded professions today. They all rely and rest on a foundation of scientism. It does unite cultures, nations, to some degree, this myth of scientism, although it remains rather superficial. Medicine, law, education are just some of the institutions that rest on this doctrine of scientism. And this becomes their moral foundation. And increasingly, for the last 100 years, interest in the divine aspect of humanity is seen as stupid or weak. The elitism within academia sells that narrative just as strongly as evangelicals preaching their religious authority. Think about the science fair at many elementary schools. Kids are told to demonstrate the science they learn in textbooks and put it on display. The adult versions of these are Nobel Prize summits and the World Science Festival in New York, which build upon and display existing thought. What more is this than a spiritual revival or camp meeting of sorts, where the latest sermon about God's laws are looked at and exalted? These science conventions aren't meant to challenge existing thought, but to gather around the beliefs and convictions that are already held by the institution. This is a social way to affirm the single moral and intellectual authority in the marketplace of ideas, which is the concept of science, and we praise the information it gives us as a god. Even highly esteemed professionals who have done rigorous scientific research their entire careers can be canceled in an instant when they challenge the institution of scientism. Rupert Sheldrake is a biochemist and cell biologist who earned his PhD at Cambridge and has published over 100 literary technical papers and 9 books, one of which, published in 2012, is called The Science Delusion. When Sheldrake pointed out fluctuations in so-called cosmological constants in a 2014 TED Talk, he was instantly slandered and professionally canceled overnight. Elite academics saw the 18-minute video and apparently felt threatened enough by this challenge of scientism that his career went from legitimate to illegitimate overnight. Even though all of the points that he made in the video can be verified through the scientific method, the threat to this authority was enough to get him canceled. And the TED Talk was banned hours after it was made public. And looking at this makes me want to suggest that scientism is the most popular and the most dangerous religion today, because just as the study of God once gave masses of people this comfort that reality is already explained and known, that comfort prevents us and actually makes us fear asking big questions about human existence and going beyond what we already believe to be true about it. The reason that I doubt scientism in any way is from people who came before me, of course, like Rupert Sheldrake, who are professionals in the field who give very good reason to challenge the institution. There's also a glimpse at the fragility of this dogmatic belief system because it incites an emotional reaction and threats and consequences when it is challenged. The idea of science is now a foundational mythology within the minds of billions of people, a myth that explains the purpose of life, the nature of reality, and answers the problem of human existence. Except it doesn't. The problem is that it doesn't answer these questions, but pretends to. It pretends we know the answer exists in information we just don't know the specifics on yet. This way of thinking about human purpose and meaning diminishes our ability to expand consciousness in other ways in order to really answer these questions, because it discourages real communication with something with purpose between a higher truth or reality and our innermost self. Imagination and intuitive insight are reduced. Replacing them is the explanation that the brain and body are the ultimate cause of everything we do and think, reducing our experience to that of organic machines. Because scientism preaches that the motivation for human existence is competition and separation, it reduces communication to an afterthought, literally, considered useful only to gain survival, status, and security for the individual. All communication becomes a social function, not a spiritual one. In fact, under scientism, all spiritual behavior is social and therefore meaningless, except for the purpose that it serves for personal survival. Scientism gives us an individualist perspective, and this mindset is bereft of connection, authenticity, and the ability to authentically connect and love. It hasn't always been this way. The myths of our ancestors did inspire love, connection, and cooperation. According to scholar and mythologist Joseph Campbell, real communication has the ability to spur leaps in consciousness, which did happen in pre-literate societies. And these societies, all of them, had the transcendent function or the divine part of their living experience. I feel this is still what drives and motivates shifts in consciousness or collective awakening of human potential. It is this divine or transcendent connection. And I believe that we will leap collectively if we commit to investigating the current myth and changing that myth to reflect more of what we know on a deeper level, a more inbuilt connection to something beyond this specific conglomerate of cells. Because pre-literate societies Those of the oral tradition had an interconnectedness ethic and really felt connected to spirituality. But not only did they feel connected, spirit was real in their lives, just as real as one's own body. Myth wasn't a bedtime story or for entertainment purposes. It was a living, breathing truth. And the reason scientism is so dangerous is because not only does it deny the transcendent function, but it breeds a kind of fear of the transcendence that we knew as more wise, more primitive societies, precisely because it does exist beyond measurement. In this society that is built on scientism, there is a fear of that which cannot be controlled through obtaining information. A good example of this is American psychologist Abraham Maslow, who came up with his five-tier model of human theory of motivation in 1945. Maslow said, instinct motivates and drives all human behavior, and these values can be summed up in 5 steps of human development. He said these are the values that drive us: survival, security, personal relationships, prestige, and self-development, which he called actualization. What he really meant by actualization in his own writings was achieving goals and skill development. And maybe this is why Joseph Campbell found this model so strange. Campbell writes that at some point he realized Maslow's model gives exactly the values that primitive society's mythology transcends. Campbell knew the mythologies of yesterday held the transcendent function right alongside our everyday lives. It kept it accessible. And this is a way of reflecting and affirming the divinity entangled with human experience. Now, this is different from the myth that we are living by, which contemporary philosopher Bernardo Kastrup refers to as a deprived myth. A deprived myth is one that deprives the inner experience of the individual from any inspiration or connection to that which transcends their limited personal sphere. A deprived myth does not have the capacity to expose the ego as limited or expand consciousness. Instead, it centers it and contracts the inner experience to superficiality. And this is why there's something lost in our contemporary mythology. It makes life seem meaningless. Like Maslow, neo-Darwinist views hold tightly on to the idea that biology moves humanity forward and nothing else. And the only reason that most people believe that isn't based on logic or reason at all. It's just what we've been told. It's just what has been preached. It's the dogma of scientism. Now, science itself, there's no question, has improved the lives of billions of people globally. That's what it's for, and that's what it does. But at the same time, it lacks any real ability to answer the deeper questions. And these are the questions scientism pretends it has already answered. Like, what is my life for? What is my greater responsibility? What function does discipline serve in my life that is greater than for my own personal benefit? And why do we love? Paul K. Chappell, a contemporary author and veteran turned peace advocate, writes in his book, "The darkest periods of my life were not the times when I felt unloved, but when I was unable to love." Scientism does this to us. It alienates us and prevents us from the ability to love. The so-called political left in the United States today promotes an ethic of care. We should care about the environment, care about whether taxes are spent on education or war, care about marginalized groups of people. But this promotion of care isn't the same care that we are given and experience upon birth into this world. When we're born, we cannot support our own necks or spinal column. We require another living being to hold to hold us with attention. And this care is the love by which we live. And in contrast to this kind of care, the care that is promoted under scientism, under fundamental dogma of scientism, is a superficial care, and it will always remain a superficial care because it coincides with the inability to love. Joseph Campbell writes in his book, Pathways to Bliss, Maslow's hierarchy has to do with biological progress only, not shifts in ethics or morality for the human species as a whole. The truth is, we require the transcendent aspect of life to experience a meaningful life that allows us to love. And just as a thought experiment, when you think critically about it, does it seem logical that something infinitely complex, like consciousness or language, would emerge from something simple and so basic it contains no generative force of its own that allows for that complexity to emerge? How can something with zero framework and no capacity for complexity suddenly create it? This miracle of emergence is what scientism believes, that infinite complexity would continue to emerge from nothing. Doesn't it seem perhaps more logical then that out of a complex potential without any necessarily material form, perhaps a field of possibility, that more defined or refined expressions of being and form would emerge from this infinite potential? And that infinite possibility we could call a higher truth or power. Not necessarily personal or even thinking, but a whole that is full of you and I and the potential for everything else, infinite complexity. And interwoven with this potential, does it seem possible to you that there might be a human refining trajectory built within that possibility and participating with that possibility? The Greeks had a word for this. They called it telos, the inbuilt reason for being. And may the telos of human participation be more than mere cell reproduction. And now, some more intellectual people, or maybe just people who enjoy math, may experience math itself as that divine function. In fact, many mathematicians describe or express the beauty that they find in the patterns of mathematics. Yet, scientism denies even this, even that divine function behind mathematics, leaving many of us, regular people, feeling at a loss for how to connect to anything, really anything, especially spirit. Because when denying that even math, a regularity that fits into natural systems so complex, yet so purely, if even that isn't a glimpse at the magnificence of spirit behind and within our lives, well, I just find that deeply depressing. Don't you? And I'm not asking you to define or agree on what that divine function or capacity is, but to consider if it's reasonably or logically possible to conceive there is a whole encompassing the information that scientism claims to be the ultimate reality. Pondering these questions and And feeling into the possibility of these questions is a start to seeing through the deprived myth of fundamental scientism that many of us live with. And I would really like for you to wonder, is it possible that maybe we are using the capacity, the whole capacity of awareness, even when we don't know it, simply by being human, and that capacity is driving the impulse to learn and transcend impulses that stagnate us as a species within the whole? And I think so. I'm really not saying that you need to believe there's a being with charitable qualities that wants the best for you, but rather, I'm asking you to be willing and open to something built into our experience that is disregarded and dismissed through the current popular mindset of scientism, which provides a kind of superficial, artificial comfort as it claims to be the ultimate truth, while increasingly giving an experience of numbness and blocking our ability to love. I do think we all need to consider this, our willingness, and also take account of and look at what is at stake if we don't. How important to you is it to have authentic, loving connection with yourself? And how important is it to you to have deeply real or intimate, honest connectedness with others? And maybe if you're like me, you may have felt alone for so long that these ideas seem abstract or far-reaching. Many of us have inner wounds that were created at some point where we really felt that we were the cause of mommy or daddy not looking into our eyes and telling us we are beautiful and valuable and smart just the way we are. Under scientism, many of us internalize the myth that we need to do something or get something in order to be inherently valuable. And this myth isn't necessary any longer. There is a wisdom in each of us that is the transcendent function. It doesn't come with growth, but with our birth into conscious experience. It is our birthright. There is a wonder to being and existing, and it rings like a pulse in the veins of every living being. And today, you may not be aware of it, and that's okay. It's there. It's wise. And maybe it's bored of this fixation on these superficial values, these false idols of scientism as the explainer of everything. That mindset is really uninteresting and really not compelling. The one that says, there, don't worry, it's all figured out already. The professionals are handling it. I would really love for all of us to consider whether there is a mystery to our life that is waiting to be discovered as a path that brings us deeper and deeper into our own lives. And that as we more fully step into our own lives, we realize it is not our own separate lives, but this ecology, this web that we are intrinsically and fundamentally interconnected with. And what if that mystery isn't an existing religion, but a divinity that is within your own body, within your own presence, within your experience of the pause between a thought or the pause between breaths? Wouldn't it be interesting to get to know that? Not with the intention of measuring it or gaining information like science seeks to do, but with the intention of building intimacy with life, with truth, with remembering love. That possibility of deepening into love, for me, is informed by cultures that came before me, before this one. And it continues to inspire me to break the mold of scientism that I was immersed in growing up and continue to be immersed in this society, to touch the roots of spirit that aren't in some history book or some family photo album, but are inbuilt into human experience. I find this mystery valid to talk about and get to know in our own way, not through some dogmatic belief system, but through introspection and communication. And I ask myself, how do people I respect know that power in themselves? What do cultures around the globe do to honor that communion? How do they honor and commune with the mystery and the spirit of life? And also, they get me to ask, what could prayer, without religion, but with earnestness and humility, continue to look like in my life? We have a lot to learn from each other. The cultures that didn't lose transcendence didn't lose the ability to love one another. And we may imagine this society today as more advanced because we have more advanced ways of dealing with poverty and crime and hunger. But do we really have any maturity in the way that we connect and love, in the way that we imagine and care? Have we really advanced, or have we simultaneously forgotten a cornerstone that is leading this whole relationship of person to person and person to species and species to planet as a whole to fall apart? That cornerstone is in your communion with the mythology of meaning and your communication with those you love in deeply meaningful, honest, intimate connection. And we need to reintroduce this new myth, not as a bedtime story, not as a fanciful dream, but as a breathing, living truth in our lives, truthfully regarded as a living presence, as a living myth of higher truth, and giving that power through the power of attention and presence right now through you. So, how can you slow down and re-inhabit your meaningful myth? That is a question that only you can answer. And I hope bridging this topic today inspires you while showing you the deprived myth of scientism is robbing you of the joy and value of meaning and the possibility to authentically connect and love in your life. And that goal is not far reaching. It simply comes with abandoning the fallacy, the myth that doesn't serve, and reintroducing and stepping back into the myth of our roots. And that is not something old, it is something new and can be generating through you even now as you listen. And I hope this is good enough reason for you to return to the divine dimension of living that all of our ancestors relied on, and to share with you that it is close by, not far away. And you can know that. You can remember that. It is your birthright as a human being, already completely full within your being, your capacity as a human, because you're already deeply interwoven with the ecology of life and being, the fabric of wholeness. And you deserve to love and be loved, and that wisdom is present in you, for you. Maybe perhaps it feels like it's been sleeping for a while and it's ready to wake up. So you already opened the door today by listening to this message. Keep the door open. Let that spark grow in you that is wise and is divine. That's all I have for you today. Please let me know if you've felt the pain of scientism, if you are feeling the call of the transcendent, or perhaps if you've already been on this path for a while, or anywhere in between. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this and how you've experienced scientism, and maybe stepping into reunification with the myth that came before this deprived one. I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. And if you're interested in more of my work, check out the website in the description. You can find more articles, free podcast downloads there. And I'd love to see you around the channel. So until then, thank you so much. Bye.